The polished mahogany table in the Quasar Corporation boardroom reflected the crisp, midday light, mirroring the expectant faces of the executives gathered. Arthur Sterling, a titan of industry, his voice a resonant baritone, commanded the room, painting a vivid picture of the company's ambitious future. A hushed anticipation hung in the air, broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioning. Suddenly, mid-sentence, his powerful delivery faltered. A subtle tremor ran through his hand, gripping the podium. His face, usually a picture of stoic confidence, blanched, a sickly pallor spreading from his temples. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, widened in a silent, desperate plea before rolling back. A heavy thud echoed through the stunned silence as Arthur Sterling's formidable frame crumpled, collapsing in a heap beside the opulent table, his carefully crafted speech notes scattering like autumn leaves. For a fleeting second, an unnatural silence enveloped the room, a collective gasp caught in the throats of the assembled executives. Then chaos erupted, a sudden jarring cacophony that shattered the boardroom's pristine order. Sharp, panicked shouts pierced the sterile air, followed by the violent scraping of expensive chairs as men and women scrambled to their feet. A crystal water carafe, precariously perched on the table's edge, toppled and shattered with a piercing crack, sending shards of glass skittering across the gleaming floor. The air, once cool and controlled, now crackled with a palpable tension, thick with the metallic tang of fear. Faces contorted in disbelief and raw terror, a stark departure from their usual composed professionalism. Hands waved frantically, some reaching out, others clutching at their own chests in mirroring anxiety. The room, a monument to corporate power with its towering glass walls overlooking the bustling avenues of Midtown, now felt like a suffocating cage. The meticulously arranged floral centerpiece seemed absurdly out of place amidst the unfolding drama, its vibrant hues clashing with the grim reality. Overhead, the recessed LED lights, designed to emit a cool, unwavering glow, now seemed to cast stark, unforgiving shadows on the faces of the panicked onlookers. The scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee was quickly overshadowed by the sharp, acrid smell of adrenaline and fear. Outside, 20 stories below, the relentless urban symphony of car horns and distant sirens continued, oblivious to the life-or-death struggle unfolding within the silent, polished confines of the Quasar Corporation's inner sanctum. Through the panoramic windows, the city sprawled in a dizzying mosaic of steel and concrete, a vibrant, indifferent organism teeming with life. Yellow taxis like busy insects crawled along the avenues, their honks a distant, almost musical counterpoint to the growing panic indoors. High above, the relentless hum of New York City, a blend of construction, distant chatter, and the rhythmic beats of street performers from blocks away, filtered faintly into the insulated chamber, a stark reminder of the world continuing its chaotic dance outside. The bright afternoon sun, usually a welcome guest, now seemed to mock the dire situation, casting long, unyielding reflections across the polished surfaces, highlighting the desperate, ineffective movements of those surrounding the fallen CEO. Back inside, the desperation deepened as Arthur Sterling lay, motionless, his breathing shallow and erratic. A junior executive, his face ashen, fumbled with his phone, shouting into it for emergency services, his voice trembling with a mixture of urgency and helplessness. Another, a seasoned vice president, knelt beside Sterling, clumsily attempting to loosen his tie, his movements tentative and without purpose, clearly lacking any medical training. The air grew heavy with unspoken questions and the terrifying realization that no one in this room, despite their vast wealth and influence, possessed the immediate knowledge to save the man who held their company's future in his hands. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, draining hope from the room. The collective despair was palpable, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on every soul present. The initial shock had given way to a frantic, yet ineffectual scramble for solutions, each attempt only highlighting the gravity of the situation. Arthur Sterling's life hung precariously, a fragile thread snapping under the immense pressure. His face, once so vibrant, was now a ghostly white, his chest barely rising. With no one seemingly able to offer more than desperate pleas and clumsy gestures, the question hung heavy in the air, a silent, terrifying echo. In this gleaming tower of power and prestige, Was there truly no one who could intervene, no one with the crucial knowledge to turn the tide against the encroaching darkness? A quiet hum, a steady rhythm filled the small, windowless archive office nestled in the lower levels of the Quasar Corporation building. This was Leo's sanctuary, a meticulously arranged haven Sophia had carved out for him, away from the cacophony of the upper floors. His thin fingers, surprisingly nimble, traced the smooth contours of a riverstone, worn soft by countless repetitions, a silent anchor in his world. He sat cross-legged on a worn but comfortable office chair, his intense gaze fixed on the tablet screen. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face, reflecting the intricate dance of a beating heart displayed in vibrant 3D. The faint, almost imperceptible flicker of the overhead fluorescent light, usually a jarring assault on his heightened senses, was momentarily relegated to the periphery of his awareness, overridden by the captivating visual symphony before him. This daily ritual, a predictable sequence of absorption and quiet stimming, was the bedrock of his stability. On the screen, a surgeon's gloved hands moved with practiced precision, navigating the delicate architecture of a human chest cavity. Leo's large, curious eyes absorbed every minute detail, from the precise incision lines to the rhythmic pulse of the artificial bypass machine. This wasn't merely entertainment. It was a deep dive into his unwavering hyperfocus, the intricate marvels of the human body, its vulnerabilities, and the precise interventions required to mend it. He processed information with an astounding, almost photographic memory, often mentally cross-referencing the visuals with vast reservoirs of knowledge gleaned from countless medical textbooks and documentaries. For Leo, the world wasn't just seen, it was dissected, analyzed, and understood through its underlying systems, a complex puzzle waiting to be solved, where every heartbeat, every breath, held a unique narrative. A soft, almost imperceptible creak of the door announced Sophia's presence. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who navigated a world of noise and expectations, always attuned to the subtle shifts in her son's environment. Her tired eyes, though etched with the daily struggles of a single mother, softened immediately upon seeing Leo. She placed a cool bottle of water on a small, cluttered desk beside him, its condensation leaving a faint ring. Without a word, she gently ran a calloused hand through his dark, slightly disheveled hair, a silent caress that conveyed volumes of love and acceptance. Leo, without breaking his intense focus on the screen, offered a barely perceptible nod, a gesture she understood as complete acknowledgement and affection. Their communication transcended the need for lengthy dialogue, built on years of shared understanding and an intuitive recognition of each other's needs, a quiet symphony of connection. Leo's world was a symphony of precise data, a complex interplay of cause and effect, where every anomaly begged for a solution. His dreams weren't of grand adventures or fantastical realms, but of perfect systems, of bodies functioning flawlessly, of the elegant logic within biological processes. He wasn't driven by ambition in the conventional sense, but by an innate compulsion to understand, to categorize, to bring order to perceived chaos. While others saw a distracted boy lost in his own world, Leo was meticulously mapping the intricate pathways of human physiology, building a vast internal library of knowledge. This unique perception, though often misunderstood by those around him, was his superpower, allowing him to perceive the subtle whispers of dysfunction that remained entirely inaudible to the untrained ear, a silent language spoken by the body itself. Though physically present within the imposing structure of Quasar Corporation, Leo existed largely on its periphery, a quiet observer in a world of bustling ambition and unspoken hierarchies. His daily presence, tolerated primarily because of Sophia's long-standing employment, often went unnoticed by the sharp-suited executives who navigated the polished corridors above. He was an anomaly, a splash of unexpected color in a monochrome corporate canvas, his unique rhythm a stark contrast to the relentless pace of the financial district. Yet, from his quiet corner, Leo absorbed the building's hidden patterns, the hum of the elevators, the specific cadence of footsteps in the service areas, the fluctuating temperatures, even the subtle shifts in the building's structural vibrations. He understood the building not as a symbol of power, but as a complex organism, its various systems interconnected. much like the human body he studied so intently. As the virtual heart continued its steady, rhythmic pulse on his tablet, a subtle shift occurred in the ambient sounds of the building. The usual predictable rhythm of distant corporate chatter and the soft whirring of machinery began to distort, replaced by an unfamiliar, unsettling undertone. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor, distinct from the building's usual structural vibrations, seemed to ripple through the floor beneath his feet. Leo's sensitive ears, trained to discern the minutest anomalies in physiological function, now registered a distant, rising tide of human distress, a chaotic symphony of hurried footsteps, raised voices, and an urgent, almost desperate edge to the air. He paused his video, his fingers stilling on the smooth stone, his gaze now fixed on the door, a nascent curiosity, tinged with a familiar need for order, beginning to stir within him. Sophia moved through the lower service corridors of the Quasar Corporation building with a practiced, almost silent efficiency, her movements honed by years of navigating the labyrinthine passages. The air here was thicker, tinged with the faint scent of industrial cleaner and the metallic tang of old pipes, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled environments above. Her hands, calloused but gentle, guided a polishing cloth across, a gleaming brass fixture, her reflection momentarily distorted in its curved surface. The distant, muffled hum of the city, a symphony of car horns and construction, was a constant companion, a reminder of the relentless world outside, yet her focus remained entirely on the task at hand. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights, every unexpected clatter from a service cart was registered, but dismissed, as she maintained her quiet, determined rhythm, a silent guardian of the building's unseen heart. As Sophia turned a corner, her path intersected abruptly with Julian Sterling, Arthur Sterling's nephew, emerging from an executive elevator, his expensive suit, a sharp, unyielding silhouette against the muted corridor. Julian paused, his gaze sweeping over Sophia with an almost imperceptible sneer, a flicker of disdain in his cold, calculating eyes. "Still tidying up, Sophia," he remarked, his voice a smooth, condescending drawl that seemed to slice through the quiet hum of the building. "One would think with all this activity, this floor would at least reflect the company's standards. We can't have distractions, can we? Especially not those that remind us of the unkempt corners of the city, or worse, those who don't quite fit in." He gestured vaguely towards a cleaning cart, implying a broader sense of disorder, a clear dig at her presence, and by extension her son's, within the pristine corporate edifice. Julian's ambition was a palpable aura, thick and suffocating, and it fueled his inherent prejudices. He viewed the entire Quasar Corporation as his rightful inheritance, a legacy to be seized rather than earned, and anyone who didn't directly contribute to his ascent was merely an obstacle, an irritating inconvenience. His disdain for Sophia, and by extension for Leo, was rooted in a profound classism, intertwined with an ableist dismissal of Leo's autism as a limitation, a nuisance that simply didn't belong in the polished, high-stakes world of corporate power. He saw their very presence as a blemish on the immaculate facade he envisioned for the company, a constant reminder of a world he wished to transcend and control, where every element was precisely ordered to serve his singular, self-serving vision. A moment later, Eleanor Vance, Arthur Sterling's lead secretary, a woman whose neat, sensible attire belied a deeply empathetic spirit, entered the same corridor. Her expression was usually composed, but her eyes held a warmth that Julian's completely lacked. She offered Sophia a small, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding in a world often dominated by cold ambition. As she passed Leo's small archive office, where the soft glow of his tablet was visible, she paused. With a gentle tap on the doorframe, she offered a small foil-wrapped cookie she'd saved from the executive lounge. "For Leo," she murmured softly to Sophia, her voice a quiet ripple of kindness. "He always seems to be working so hard in there." The contrast between Julian's sharp, dismissive words and Eleanor's gentle, unsolicited gesture was stark, a silent declaration of the invisible battle lines drawn within the seemingly unified corporate structure. Julian represented the rigid, unfeeling hierarchy, quick to judge and dismiss based on perceived status or normality, his ambition blinding him to anything beyond his own self-interest. Eleanor, conversely, embodied a quiet, unassuming humanity, her empathy extending to those often overlooked, her gestures small but significant, planting the seeds of an unlikely alliance. Her brief interaction with Leo, though indirect, underscored her capacity to see beyond the surface, recognizing a unique spark where others saw only difference, setting the stage for the pivotal roles they would soon play. Suddenly, the hushed efficiency of the upper floors fractured. A distinct, urgent buzz resonated through the building's ventilation system, subtly different from its usual hum. Then a faint, almost imperceptible tremor like a distant ripple seemed to pass through the very foundations. Sophia's hand stilled on the brass fixture, her brow furrowing with an instinctive unease. Julian, still hovering nearby, his phone suddenly vibrating with an insistent urgency, barked into it, his face contorting from disdain to a mixture of alarm and barely concealed excitement. Eleanor, too, registered the shift, her kind eyes widening as she heard the distant, muffled rise of panicked voices filtering down from above, drawing all three disparate individuals, with their vastly different intentions, into the rapidly unfolding crisis. The initial paralyzing shock on the executive floor quickly gave way to a burgeoning panic that spread like wildfire, its tendrils reaching beyond the boardroom's shattered glass. The urgent, clipped tones of 911 operators now echoed from multiple phones, each call a desperate plea for help that seemed to dissolve into the suffocating air. Executives, their faces contorted with a mixture of fear and ineffectual urgency, stumbled over one another, their expensive suits brushing against scattered notes and the lingering scent of espresso now overshadowed by the sharp tang of despair. The building's ventilation system, usually a steady, calming hum, seemed to amplify the rising tide of human distress, carrying the desperate shouts and frantic whispers down the polished corridors, a chilling premonition of corporate instability now, palpable to anyone within earshot. The gravity of Arthur Sterling's collapse was no longer confined to a single room. It was a seismic event rippling through the very core of Quasar Corporation, threatening to unravel its meticulously constructed facade of control and power. Inside the chaotic boardroom, the desperate attempts at first aid proved tragically futile, each fumbling gesture only underscoring the stark reality of their collective helplessness. A marketing director, his face slick with sweat, attempted to elevate Arthur's legs, a textbook maneuver remembered from a long-forgotten first aid course, but his hands trembled and his movements lacked conviction. Another executive, a seasoned financier, frantically unbuttoned Arthur's shirt, exposing a chest that rose and fell with increasingly shallow, irregular gasps. The vibrant red of the boardroom's plush carpet seemed to mock the pallor of Arthur Sterling's skin, a stark visual testament to the life rapidly draining from his formidable frame. With every passing second, the air grew heavier, thick with unspoken questions, and the terrifying realization that their combined wealth and influence, usually the keys to any solution, were utterly useless against the relentless march of a failing heart. Julian Sterling, striding with a false air of authority amidst the unfolding disaster, barked orders that only added to the cacophony, his voice sharp with thinly veiled irritation rather than genuine concern for his uncle. "Get security! Clear the room! We can't have this spectacle!" he commanded, his eyes darting towards the door as if anticipating reporters, his primary focus clearly on damage control for the company's image and his own potential inheritance. He fumbled with his own phone, not to call for medical help but to silence the insistent calls from panicked board members, his jaw tight with frustration. His presence, rather than calming the situation, injected a new layer of tension, a simmering, a resentment from others who recognized his self-serving priorities. The scent of ozone from the overworked electronics mingled with the acrid smell of his barely contained ambition, a toxic cocktail in the already strained atmosphere. The clock on the wall, usually an unnoticed fixture in the background, now seemed to tick with an audible, relentless urgency, each second a hammer blow against the fragile hope that still flickered. The initial delay in professional medical intervention, compounded by the executive's uncoordinated and untrained efforts, was visibly taking its toll on Arthur Sterling. His skin, once a vibrant, healthy tone, now bore a faint bluish tinge around his lips, a terrifying sign of oxygen deprivation. The financial implications, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. The sudden incapacitation, or worse, death of the CEO could send shockwaves through the stock market, jeopardizing countless livelihoods and plunging the company into an unprecedented crisis. The collective fear was no longer just for Arthur, but for the looming unseen disaster that threatened to engulf them all, a silent, predatory beast circling their gleaming tower. Frustration mounted, a palpable wave of despair washing over the room as every conventional solution proved utterly inadequate. The few executives with basic CPR training tried to administer chest compressions, but their technique was hesitant, lacking the necessary force and rhythm, their faces etched with the grim understanding that they were merely going through the motions. The paramedics, caught in the relentless New York City traffic, were still minutes away, an eternity in the face of a failing heart. The air, once filled with the scent of ambition and fresh paper, now carried the metallic tang of fear and the faint, unsettling smell of antiseptic from a hastily opened first aid kit. A sense of profound helplessness settled over the assembled, their polished confidence replaced by raw, unvarnished terror as the gravity of their situation truly sank in, revealing the stark limits of their power. Julian, seeing the growing desperation and the clear failure of conventional methods, seized the opportunity to consolidate his perceived authority, even as chaos swirled. He began to dismiss any suggestion that wasn't under his direct purview, his voice laced with a cynical edge. "This is a medical emergency, not a miracle cure convention," he sneered, eyeing anyone who suggested anything outside the standard protocol, subtly discrediting potential unconventional solutions or individuals. The room, now a crucible of fear and futility, seemed to hold its breath as Arthur Sterling's breathing grew even more ragged, each gasp a testament to the fading light within him. The question hung heavy and unspoken in the suffocating silence. If the combined might and intellect of Quasar Corporation couldn't save its leader, who or what possibly could, before time irrevocably ran out? The attempts at chest compressions, initiated by a marketing director named Richard, were more symbolic than effective. His hands, usually adept at crafting compelling campaigns, fumbled with Arthur Sterling's shirt, his movements hesitant and lacking the necessary depth. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on Richard's forehead, reflecting the overhead lights, as his breath hitched with each ineffective push. The rhythmic thump, thump he tried to maintain was erratic, too shallow, entirely devoid of the powerful, life-sustaining force required. Around him, the other executives, their initial shock morphing into a collective, suffocating despair, watched with wide, horrified eyes. The air, already thick with the metallic tang of fear, grew heavier with the unspoken realization that their combined corporate might was utterly useless against the relentless march of a failing heart. Each failed compression was a hammer blow against the dwindling hope, amplifying the sense of agonizing helplessness that permeated the once pristine boardroom. Another executive, a vice president of mergers and acquisitions named Bethany, knelt beside Arthur, her expensive silk blouse now rumpled and stained. With trembling fingers, she attempted to tilt his head back, an almost instinctive yet medically insufficient gesture to clear his airway. Her voice, usually sharp and authoritative in negotiations, was now a mere whisper of desperate pleas. Arthur's breathing, already shallow, grew more sporadic, punctuated by faint rattling gasps that sent a fresh wave of terror through the room. His lips, once a healthy pink, now had a faint, alarming bluish tinge, a stark visual testament to the critical lack of oxygen circulating in his formidable body. The collective morale plummeted further, the grim reality of their utter inadequacy settling like a shroud. Every passing second of their fumbling, well-intentioned but ultimately futile efforts only served to highlight the rapidly diminishing window of opportunity, painting a bleak picture of impending loss. Julian Sterling, rather than contributing to any effective aid, continued to pace the periphery of the chaotic scene, his voice a sharp, cutting contrast to the rising panic. "This is an absolute disaster. Who is handling the press? We can't have this image leaking," he snapped, his eyes darting towards the shattered glass of the water carafe, seemingly more perturbed by the mess than the dying man beside it. He dismissed a junior analyst's suggestion to check for an AED in the building's infirmary with a dismissive wave, his focus entirely on controlling the narrative, not saving a life. His self-serving priorities became glaringly apparent, injecting a new, bitter layer of resentment into the already strained atmosphere. The faint hum of the building's ventilation system seemed to carry the acrid scent of his barely contained ambition, mingling toxically with the despair, further paralyzing any cohesive, life-saving effort. In his quiet archive office, Leo's fingers, still tracing the smooth contours of his riverstone, paused. The rhythmic thump-thump of the virtual heart on his tablet screen, usually his sole focus, began to compete with a new unsettling symphony filtering down from the upper floors. His acute auditory senses, finely tuned to discern the minutest physiological anomalies, now picked up a distinct, irregular rhythm underlying the muffled chaos, a faint, erratic, famous thump-thump gasp that was unmistakably a struggling human heart, not just general panic. He also registered the desperate, strained quality in the distant shouts, the frantic, uncoordinated footsteps. His brow furrowed slightly. His large eyes, usually calm pools of intense focus, now held a nascent flicker of concern, processing this new, discordant data against his vast internal library of medical knowledge. The usual predictable hum of the building had been replaced by a chaotic, urgent narrative that demanded his unique attention. Back on the executive floor, the grim tableau deepened as Arthur Sterling's condition spiraled further. His breathing became little more than a shallow flutter, his chest barely rising, and the faint bluish tinge around his lips darkened to an alarming shade. The scattered first aid attempts had ceased, replaced by a collective, defeated silence, broken only by the faint, desperate gasps of the dying man. Executives, their faces etched with raw terror and profound helplessness, stood frozen, their polished confidence utterly shattered. The scent of expensive cologne and fear had given way to the faint metallic tang of blood and the sterile, unsettling smell of antiseptic from the hastily opened but useless first aid kit. The realization that their vast wealth and influence were utterly impotent against the relentless assault on Arthur's body settled like a heavy, suffocating blanket, draining every last vestige of hope from the once vibrant room. The ticking clock on the wall now seemed to scream its relentless count, each second a painful reminder of time irrevocably running out. Arthur Sterling's body shuddered once, a final terrifying tremor that seemed to signal the very edge of life. Julian, seeing the stark reality, finally fell silent, his face a mask of shocked disbelief, his ambition momentarily overshadowed by the overwhelming, undeniable failure. A collective gasp rippled through the room as Arthur's breathing almost ceased, replaced by an unnerving stillness. At that very moment, in his quiet office below, Leo's eyes snapped shut for a brief second, his fingers tightening around the riverstone. The discordant symphony of distress and the internal pattern of a failing heart had converged, demanding action. His hyperfocus, now fully engaged, pulled him with an undeniable urgency towards the source of the critical anomaly, a silent, internal command compelling him to restore the broken order. A discordant symphony of distress, sharp and jarring, now pierced the quiet hum of the archive office, overriding the steady pulse of the virtual heart on Leo's tablet. The faint, erratic, thump-thump gasp he'd registered earlier had intensified, a desperate, broken rhythm echoing through the building's very structure, resonating with an unsettling urgency that spoke directly to his hyperfocus. His fingers, still wrapped around the smooth riverstone, tightened, the cool surface a grounding anchor amidst the rising tide of chaos. The world, usually a predictable mosaic of patterns and systems, was now presenting a critical anomaly, a profound disruption that his unique mind instinctively sought to rectify. It wasn't curiosity that pulled him, but an innate, almost visceral compulsion to restore order to the malfunctioning system, to mend the broken. His large eyes, usually absorbed in the digital world, snapped open wider, now fixed on the door, a silent, internal command, compelling him to move. The usual comfort of his sanctuary suddenly felt stifling, the gravity of the situation a heavy weight pressing down, demanding his intervention. Pushing himself up from the worn office chair, Leo moved with an uncharacteristic swiftness, his thin frame surprisingly agile as he navigated the narrow space. The soft, rhythmic stimming of the riverstone against his palm was the only outward sign of his internal processing, a subtle anchor in the escalating sensory assault of the building's lower levels. He passed startled cleaning staff, their faces etched with confusion and distant fear, their hurried whispers a muffled cacophony against his sensitive ears. The fluorescent lights, usually an unbearable flicker, now seemed to pulse with a heightened intensity, threatening to overwhelm him, yet his focus remained singularly fixed on the source of the distress above. His gait, typically deliberate, held a newfound purpose, each step carrying him closer to the chaotic heart of the corporation, a small, determined figure drawn by an invisible thread to the unfolding crisis, his unique perception guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors. Just as Leo reached the main service elevator bank, Sophia appeared from around a corner, her face already creased with worry from the distant commotion. Her eyes, tired yet sharp, immediately locked onto her son's determined expression, a silent understanding passing between them. She knew that look. It was the same intense focus he displayed when dissecting complex medical diagrams, a deep, unwavering concentration that bordered on obsession. Her initial instinct was to shield him from the chaos, to pull him back into the safety of their quiet routine, but she saw the undeniable pull in his eyes, the urgent need that transcended his usual anxieties. Reaching out, she gently but firmly placed her hand on his back, a silent acknowledgement of his path, her unwavering support, a protective shield against the turbulent world they were about to enter. She knew with a certainty that defied logic that he wasn't just observing, he was drawn to solve. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, revealing a scene of frantic activity on the executive floor, a stark contrast to the subdued lower levels. Security personnel, their faces grim, attempted to cordon off the boardroom, their voices terse as they directed bewildered executives away. Julian Sterling, his expensive suit rumpled, stood near the entrance, his face a mask of furious frustration as he barked into his phone, clearly attempting to manage the rapidly deteriorating optics. His eyes, cold and calculating, narrowed as he spotted Sophia and Leo emerging from the service elevator, an unwelcome intrusion into his carefully orchestrated crisis. "What in God's name are you doing up here, Sophia?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension, instantly dismissing their presence. "And him? This is hardly a playground. We don't need distractions from the staff, especially not this." He gestured vaguely at Leo, his disdain palpable, his words a venomous echo of his deep-seated prejudice. Before Sophia could even formulate a response, Julian stepped forward, his body language a clear barrier, attempting to physically block their path to the boardroom entrance. "Get him out of here, Sophia. He's a nuisance, a liability," he spat, his voice rising with barely contained fury, his ableist disdain for Leo's autism now fully unleashed. He reached out, a hand hovering as if to push Leo away, his eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction at the thought of reasserting his control. But Sophia, though physically smaller, met his gaze with an unyielding resolve, her protective instinct blazing. She subtly shifted, placing her body between Julian and Leo, a silent, defiant wall. "He's not a nuisance, Mr. Sterling," she stated, her voice quiet but firm, a steel core beneath the gentle tone. "He's here because he can help. He always sees what others miss." Her words, though few, carried the weight of years of quiet struggle and unwavering faith, a stark challenge to Julian's dismissive authority. Leo, though accustomed to such dismissals, felt a familiar wave of anxiety ripple through him, the loud voices and the physical tension a jarring assault on his heightened senses. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his riverstone, a subtle self-regulation amidst the growing pressure. He glanced up at his mother, her eyes usually tired, now burned with a fierce, unwavering conviction that mirrored his own internal drive. Her slight, encouraging nod, a silent affirmation of his purpose, was all the permission he needed, a powerful anchor in the swirling chaos. He took a hesitant step forward, his large eyes now drawn towards the muffled sounds emanating from the boardroom, the erratic thump-thump gasp, now clearer, more urgent. Despite the initial insecurity, a nascent determination solidified within him. The broken system within called out, and he, Leo, the boy who heard what others couldn't, felt an undeniable pull to answer. The stage was set for an intervention no one expected. Sophia, her face a mask of fierce determination, moved with purpose, her hand gently but firmly guiding Leo through the throng of stunned executives. Eleanor Vance, spotting Sophia's plight, instinctively stepped forward, her sensible heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Together, they began to shepherd the bewildered onlookers, carving a small vital circle around Arthur Sterling's prone form. The air, still thick with the metallic tang of fear and the lingering scent of despair, seemed to resist their efforts. But Sophia's quiet resolve was an unyielding force. A few executives, caught between their own panic and a vague sense of deference to Eleanor, hesitantly stepped back, their expensive shoes scraping on the scattered notes. Julian Sterling, still fuming at the intrusion, watched with narrowed eyes, a sneer playing on his lips. But even he seemed momentarily disarmed by Sophia's focused intensity, a primal protective instinct radiating from her. The collective uncertainty in the room was palpable, a heavy cloak that pressed down on all. Yet within this small, rapidly forming space, a fragile hope began to flicker, almost imperceptibly, against the encroaching darkness, a quiet defiance born of a mother's love. Leo, his large eyes now intensely focused on Arthur Sterling, ignored Julian's sneer and the lingering chaos. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping upwards to a specific recessed LED light fixture that flickered almost imperceptibly, yet was a jarring assault on his sensitive visual processing. "Silence," he stated, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the muffled murmurs like a finely honed blade. "And turn off that flickering light." His thin finger, still tracing the smooth contours of his riverstone, pointed directly at the offending fixture. A collective gasp rippled through the bewildered executives, a child giving orders in their hallowed boardroom. Some exchanged incredulous glances, others looked to Eleanor for confirmation. Eleanor, recognizing the unique request as a genuine need, quickly scanned the room for a light switch, her movements precise and efficient. The sheer audacity of the demand, coupled with Leo's unwavering intensity, momentarily stunned them into hesitant obedience. A fragile quiet, descending, as the offending light clicked off, plunging a small section of the room into a softer, more manageable illumination. A visible wave of relief washed over Leo's face. The subtle flicker, a constant source of sensory overload, had vanished, allowing his hyperfocus to sharpen, like a lens snapping into perfect clarity. The sudden hush, though still punctuated by distant sirens and the frantic whispers of those outside their newly formed circle, provided a crucial auditory buffer. His shoulders, previously held taut with barely contained tension, visibly relaxed, and his breathing deepened into a more even rhythm. This immediate environmental adaptation, born of a deep understanding of his unique needs, allowed his profound medical knowledge to surface unhindered by the sensory assault. He was no longer just a boy in a chaotic room. He was a mind fully engaged, accessing vast reservoirs of information, preparing to diagnose the complex, life-threatening puzzle before him. The subtle shift in his demeanor was profound, a testament to the power of a tailored environment. The executives watched, a mixture of bewilderment and hesitant curiosity etched on their faces. Julian Sterling, however, scoffed loudly, his arms crossed, his disdain palpable. "This is preposterous. We're wasting time with a child's whims," he hissed, his voice a sharp, cutting whisper that threatened to shatter the fragile calm. Yet no one moved to contradict him, a testament to the sheer desperation that had gripped the room. Eleanor, however, met Leo's gaze with a small, knowing nod, a silent affirmation of trust that transcended the chaos. Sophia, her hand still resting protectively on Leo's back, offered him a barely perceptible squeeze, a powerful, unspoken message of unwavering support and belief. Her eyes, usually etched with weariness, now burned with a quiet, fierce pride, conveying to Leo that he was seen, understood, and capable. This moment of shared understanding, a silent pact between mother and son, solidified their bond against the rising tide of skepticism. With the environment now partially adapted, Leo knelt beside Arthur Sterling, his intense gaze sweeping over the man's ashen face, taking in every minute detail. His fingers, still gently rubbing the smooth riverstone, moved with an almost imperceptible rhythm, a quiet form of self-regulation that allowed his mind to process the overwhelming data. He leaned closer, his acute hearing now fully engaged, straining to discern the faintest nuances of Arthur's shallow, erratic breathing and the almost imperceptible flutter of his pulse. This was his true tool, his ability to perceive the subtle, often ignored physiological whispers that spoke volumes to his encyclopedic medical knowledge. He wasn't relying on external instruments. His own body, finely tuned to anomalies, became the diagnostic device. Every visual cue, Every auditory vibration was instantly cross-referenced against the vast internal library of human anatomy and pathology he had meticulously built over years of hyper-focused study, a silent, rapid-fire analysis. A profound stillness settled over Leo as he absorbed the critical information, his mind a whirlwind of complex medical data. He didn't speak, but his posture, now entirely focused and devoid of any previous anxiety, conveyed an undeniable sense of purpose. He reached out a thin hand, hovering for a moment above Arthur Sterling's chest, not yet touching, but poised, his internal calculations complete. The rhythmic thrum of the river stone in his other hand intensified slightly, a subtle signal of his readiness. Sophia, watching her son, knew this look. It was the calm before the storm of his genius, the moment when his unique mind translated complex data into precise action. Eleanor too sensed the shift, her eyes fixed on the boy with a newfound awe. The air, once heavy with despair, now crackled with a nascent, almost terrifying anticipation. Leo was ready to begin, not with a guess, but with the undeniable certainty of a prodigy about to mend a broken system. Leo kneels beside Arthur Sterling, his thin frame poised with an almost surgical precision that belied his age. His large, intelligent eyes, now devoid of the earlier anxiety, scanned Arthur's ashen face, discerning the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in skin tone and muscle tension. He leaned closer, his acute auditory senses fully engaged, filtering out the lingering chaos of the room to focus entirely on the man's chest. The rhythmic thump-thump gasp he had heard from below was now clearer, closer, a broken symphony that spoke directly to his vast internal library of medical knowledge. His fingers, still gently rubbing the smooth river stone, moved with an almost imperceptible rhythm, a quiet form of self-regulation that allowed his mind to process the overwhelming data. He wasn't relying on external instruments. His own body, finely tuned to anomalies, became the diagnostic device, rapidly cross-referencing every visual cue and auditory vibration against years of hyper-focused study. "It's a ventricular arrhythmia," Leo stated, his voice quiet but remarkably clear, cutting through the hushed tension of the boardroom like a finely honed scalpel. His gaze remained fixed on Arthur's chest, the precise location of the irregular flutter now pinpointed in his mind. "The electrical impulses are chaotic, not coordinated. He's not getting enough oxygen. To his brain or organs." He paused, his brow furrowing slightly as if listening to a complex internal dialogue. The air in the room seemed to thicken with the weight of his unexpected medical jargon, leaving the executives momentarily stunned. Julian Sterling, however, quickly recovered, a sneer twisting his lips. "What are you going to do, a cartoon diagnosis? Are we supposed to believe a child playing doctor now?" He scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension, a clear attempt to undermine Leo's authority and dismiss his startling pronouncement. Julian, his face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and barely concealed rage, lunged forward, his hand reaching out as if to physically pull Leo away from his uncle. "Get away from him, you little freak! This is preposterous!" he snarled, his voice echoing harshly in the suddenly quiet room, threatening to shatter Leo's fragile concentration. But Sophia was quicker, stepping protectively in front of Leo, her small frame a defiant shield against Julian's aggression. Eleanor Vance too moved with surprising speed, placing a calming hand on Julian's arm, her voice firm. "Mr. Sterling, please, he's trying to help," she implored, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent standoff between desperate hope and cruel prejudice, the fate of Arthur Sterling hanging precariously in the balance as Leo's focus teetered on the brink of disruption. Despite the jarring interruption, Leo remained remarkably composed, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around his smooth river stone, a subtle anchor amidst the escalating sensory assault. He ignored Julian's venomous words, his gaze never leaving Arthur Sterling. "His left ventricle is struggling to pump efficiently," Leo continued, his voice unwavering, as if Julian's outburst hadn't even registered. "We need to support the circulation." He paused, his eyes darting to a marketing executive's hand, which was still fumbling with Arthur's tie. A flicker of hesitation crossed Leo's face, a momentary drop in his usual unwavering confidence as he processed the next critical step. He needed to be precise, clear, and overcome the immense pressure of the skeptical audience and the rapidly fading life before him. "Elevate his legs," Leo instructed, his voice gaining a quiet urgency, his thin finger pointing with surprising authority towards Arthur's lower body. "And apply firm, continuous pressure here, just below the sternum, but not directly on it. Just enough to stimulate, not to compress his ribs." He demonstrated with his own hand on the air, a precise, almost delicate gesture, illustrating the exact spot. The marketing executive, Richard, startled but desperate, hesitantly followed Leo's instruction, his movements clumsy at first, but driven by a burgeoning, irrational hope. As Richard applied the pressure, Arthur Sterling let out a faint, rattling groan, and his chest, which had been barely rising, gave a shallow but undeniable gasp. A collective, stunned gasp rippled through the room, a shared recognition of this micro-victory, a fragile spark of life returning. The faint gasp, a testament to Leo's precise instruction, sent a ripple of astonished relief through the room, momentarily silencing Julian's derision. Leo, seeing the subtle shift in Arthur's pallor, pushed past his earlier hesitation. "He needs oxygen, and his pulse is too weak," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the room, seeking a solution, his mind racing through pathways of knowledge. He pointed to a small, almost unnoticed emergency kit near the conference room door, containing a portable oxygen mask. "That, and we need to ensure his airway is clear." His voice, though still soft, carried an undeniable authority, a quiet force that compelled action. The executives, their faces etched with a newfound tentative hope, began to move, a sudden collective purpose animating their previously paralyzed efforts. The tide, undeniably turning, even if the battle was far from won. Leo, his thin frame unyielding, knelt closer to Arthur Sterling, his intense gaze fixed on the man's chest. He didn't merely look, he perceived, his acute vision registering the minute, almost imperceptible quiver beneath Sterling's expensive suit, a subtle dance of chaotic muscle fibers, his head tilted slightly, his sensitive ears filtering the lingering boardroom chaos, isolating the erratic, desperate thump, thump, gasp of Arthur's heart. He was not just hearing a heartbeat, he was dissecting its rhythm, identifying the precise, chaotic electrical impulses that betrayed its malfunction. His fingers, still tracing the smooth river stone, moved with an almost imperceptible rhythm, a quiet form of self-regulation that allowed his mind to process the overwhelming data. Every visual cue, every auditory vibration, was instantly cross-referenced against the vast internal library of human anatomy and pathology he had meticulously built over years of hyper-focused study, a silent, rapid-fire analysis of a system in profound disarray. "It's a ventricular arrhythmia," Leo stated, his voice quiet but remarkably clear, cutting through the hushed tension of the boardroom like a finely honed scalpel. His gaze remained fixed on Arthur's chest, the precise location of the irregular flutter now pinpointed in his mind. "The electrical impulses are chaotic, not coordinated. He's not getting enough oxygen to his brain or organs." He paused, his brow furrowing slightly, as if listening to a complex internal dialogue, his unique senses processing unseen data. The air in the room seemed to thicken with the weight of his unexpected medical jargon, leaving the executives momentarily stunned. Julian Sterling, however, quickly recovered, a sneer twisting his lips. "What are you going to do? A cartoon diagnosis? Are we supposed to believe a child playing doctor now?" He scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension, a clear attempt to undermine Leo's authority and dismiss his startling pronouncement, his cold eyes sweeping the room for validation of his own disdain. Julian, his face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and barely concealed rage, lunged forward, his hand reaching out as if to physically pull Leo away from his uncle. "Get away from him, you little freak. This is preposterous," he snarled, his voice echoing harshly in the suddenly quiet room, threatening to shatter Leo's fragile concentration. But Sophia was quicker, stepping protectively in front of Leo, her small frame a defiant shield against Julian's aggression. Eleanor Vance, too, moved with surprising speed, placing a calming hand on Julian's arm, her voice firm. "Mr. Sterling, please. He's trying to help," she implored, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. Despite the jarring interruption, Leo remained remarkably composed, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around his smooth river stone, a subtle anchor amidst the escalating sensory assault. He ignored Julian's venomous words, his gaze never leaving Arthur Sterling. "His left ventricle is struggling to pump efficiently," Leo continued, his voice unwavering, as if Julian's outburst hadn't even registered. "We need to support the circulation." His eyes, quick and discerning, darted to Arthur Sterling's rumpled jacket. He has a small dark blue vial in his inner left pocket. Nitroglycerin. It's for his heart. He then turned to Richard, the marketing executive. "Elevate his legs," Leo instructed, his voice gaining a quiet urgency, his thin finger pointing with surprising authority towards Arthur's lower body. "And apply firm, continuous pressure here," he demonstrated with his own hand on the air, precise and almost delicate, just below the sternum but not directly on it, just enough to stimulate, not to compress his ribs. Richard, startled but desperate, hesitantly followed Leo's instruction, his movements clumsy at first, but driven by a burgeoning irrational hope. As Richard, with trembling hands, retrieved the vial and applied the precise pressure Leo indicated, a profound stillness fell over the frantic scene. Arthur Sterling let out a faint, rattling groan, and his chest, which had been barely rising, gave a shallow but undeniable gasp. A collective, stunned gasp rippled through the room, a shared recognition of this micro-victory, a fragile spark of life returning to the CEO's pallid face. Julian Sterling, who had been sneering just moments before, now stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror, his carefully constructed disdain shattered, replaced by the crushing weight of undeniable evidence. The silence in the room, once thick with despair, now held a nascent, almost terrified awe, as the impossible, the truly unexpected, began to unfold before their very eyes, his own prejudice glaringly exposed. The faint gasp, a testament to Leo's precise instruction, sent a ripple of astonished relief through the room, momentarily silencing Julian's derision. Leo, seeing the subtle shift in Arthur's pallor and the improved, though still weak, rhythm, pushed past his earlier hesitation. "He needs oxygen," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the room, seeking a solution, his mind racing through pathways of knowledge. He pointed to a small, almost unnoticed, emergency kit near the conference room door, containing a portable oxygen mask. "That, and we need to ensure his airway is clear." His voice, though still soft, carried an undeniable authority, a quiet force that compelled action. The executives, their faces etched with a newfound tentative hope, began to move, a sudden collective purpose animating their previously paralyzed efforts, the tide undeniably turning. Even if the battle was far from won, as Arthur Sterling's next breath was deeper, clearer. The heavy boardroom doors, previously a symbol of corporate might, now burst open with a sudden thud, announcing the arrival of two paramedics, their faces grim and professional, their medical bags clutched tightly. Their hurried movements disrupted the fragile awe that had just settled, their presence cutting through the lingering scent of ozone and fear with the sharp, clean smell of antiseptic. Julian Sterling, still rooted to the spot, stared at his uncle with a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, sickening realization that his carefully laid plans might be crumbling. His jaw was clenched, a muscle, twitching almost imperceptibly, as he watched the life slowly, undeniably return to Arthur's face, a stark refutation of his disdain. The chaotic symphony of the city outside, a distant hum just moments ago, now seemed to press in, a reminder of the world that continued, indifferent to his personal defeat. Leo, still kneeling beside Arthur, his river stone clutched in his hand, looked up at the paramedics with his intense, unblinking gaze. His voice, quiet but remarkably clear, and devoid of any emotional inflection, cut directly to the core of the medical emergency. Ventricular arrhythmia, possible myocardial infarction, nitroglycerin administered, pressure applied infrasternal, airway cleared, breathing irregular, improving, pulse weak but present. He delivered the rapid-fire diagnosis with the precision of a seasoned physician, his large eyes scanning their faces for acknowledgement. The lead paramedic, a burly man with kind but skeptical eyes, paused, his brow furrowing as he processed the unexpected medical terminology coming from an 11-year-old boy. The faint scent of their sterile gloves mingled with the acrid tang of adrenaline, a bizarre juxtaposition to the child's calm authority. The paramedics, initially taken aback by Leo's precise summary, quickly moved with practiced efficiency. One knelt beside Arthur, immediately confirming the faint but steadying pulse. The other attached an oxygen mask, the soft hiss of the gas filling the room, and began to ready a stretcher. The lead paramedic, after a brief assessing glance at Leo, offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a silent validation that transcended the boy's age. They worked with a focused urgency, their movements fluid and coordinated, a stark contrast to the earlier fumbling attempts of the executives. The boardroom, once a scene of desperate chaos, was now a hub of controlled medical intervention, the vibrant red carpet still a testament to the earlier panic, but now overshadowed by the quiet hum of life-saving equipment. As Arthur Sterling was carefully transferred onto the stretcher, a collective sigh of profound relief swept through the room, palpable as a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. The executives, their faces still pale but now etched with exhaustion rather than terror, watched in stunned silence, their polished confidence slowly returning, albeit tinged with humility. Sophia, her hand still resting gently on Leo's shoulder, felt a surge of quiet, fierce pride, her eyes usually weary, now shining with unshed tears of gratitude and triumph. Eleanor Vance, standing beside them, her sensible shoes now scuffed, gazed at Leo with unadulterated awe, a silent testament to the extraordinary event she had just witnessed. Julian Sterling, however, remained a statue of stone, his face a mask of bitter defeat, his carefully constructed world of prejudice crumbling around him, exposed and humiliated by the undeniable brilliance of a child he had so readily dismissed. The stretcher, bearing the still unconscious but stable Arthur Sterling, was carefully wheeled out of the boardroom, its quiet departure signaling the end of the immediate crisis. The heavy doors swung shut with a soft click, leaving behind a lingering scent of antiseptic and the ghostly echo of recent fear, slowly replaced by a quiet, almost reverent awe. Executives began to disperse, their hushed conversations filled with disbelief and a newfound respect for the boy, who had defied all expectations. Leo, still holding his riverstone, watched them go, his large eyes now calm pools reflecting the subdued light. He squeezed the stone once more, a subtle, almost imperceptible self-regulation, before turning to Sophia, a silent question in his gaze. The world outside the boardroom, once a chaotic blur, now held a new, quiet promise, a gentle transition towards an unforeseen future where his unique gifts would finally be recognized, his quiet victory resonating through the very walls of the Quasar Corporation. Weeks later, the Quasar Corporation boardroom, once a crucible of panic and despair, transformed into an arena of carefully orchestrated gratitude. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lights, reflecting the crisp, expectant faces of executives, though their previous terror was now replaced by an almost reverent solemnity. Arthur Sterling, surprisingly robust, stood at the podium, his voice a resonant baritone, carrying a newfound gravitas that hinted at the profound experience he had endured. The air, typically thick with ambition, now hummed with a different energy, a palpable sense of anticipation tinged with curiosity. Julian Sterling, standing stiffly among the rows of chairs, his expensive suit impeccable, wore a strained, almost sickly pallor, his eyes darting uneasily, a stark contrast to the comfortable ease of those around him. The faint, sweet scent of fresh flowers in the centerpiece, mingled with the lingering, almost imperceptible metallic tang of recent fear, a silent reminder of the near tragedy that had unfolded. Arthur Sterling began to speak, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on a quiet corner where Leo sat beside Sophia, his small riverstone clutched in his hand. "We are here today," he stated, his voice clear and unwavering, "not just to mark my recovery, but to acknowledge an extraordinary act of courage and brilliance." His words resonated with sincerity, devoid of the corporate jargon that usually filled the space. He spoke of Leo's unique perception, his profound knowledge, and his unwavering calm amidst chaos, carefully emphasizing that Leo's different way of seeing was not a limitation, but a formidable strength that had saved his life. Leo, though visibly uncomfortable with the direct attention, offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his fingers tightening on the stone, processing the unexpected praise. Sophia, beside him, her hand gently resting on his knee, felt a wave of profound, overwhelming pride wash over her, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Then, Arthur Sterling announced the first of the concrete rewards, his voice ringing with conviction, To Leo, whose invaluable knowledge proved to be the difference between life and death, Quasar Corporation is honored to offer a full scholarship to the prestigious New York Academy for Exceptional Minds. A ripple of murmuring astonishment, quickly followed by a swell of applause, swept through the room. This specialized school, known for fostering unique talents and providing tailored environments for neurodiverse children, was a dream Sophia had barely dared to whisper. Leo's large eyes, usually intent on internal patterns, widened slightly, a rare flicker of genuine surprise and subtle joy visible on his face. He glanced at Sophia, a silent question passing between them, before his gaze returned to Arthur, a nascent sense of recognition blossoming within him. Julian's face, however, was a mask of furious, barely contained resentment. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched visibly. Arthur continued, his voice softer but equally resolute. And to Sophia, whose unwavering strength, dedication, and profound faith in her son brought him to us in our hour of greatest need, we offer a new position, Director of Facilities Management. He paused, allowing the significance of the promotion to sink in. With significantly expanded responsibilities, better working conditions, and a salary that reflects her invaluable contribution to this company, and indeed to my very life. The room erupted in another wave of applause, more genuine this time, a collective acknowledgement of Sophia's quiet heroism. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, a soft gasp escaping her lips, her eyes welling up with tears of relief and gratitude. Julian, unable to contain his simmering rage, abruptly turned his back, a clear gesture of open contempt, his carefully constructed world of prejudice crumbling publicly around him. Arthur Sterling then stepped down from the podium, making his way directly to Leo, a deliberate act that left the assembled executives momentarily stunned. He extended a hand, not condescendingly, but with genuine respect. "Leo," he said, his voice imbued with a deep sincerity, "thank you. You are an extraordinary young man." Leo, uncharacteristically, met his gaze, his hand briefly grasping Arthur's, a quick, firm shake. "You are welcome, Mr. Sterling," he replied, his voice quiet but clear, a direct and unadorned acknowledgement that conveyed a newfound comfort in this unexpected interaction. The shift in the room was palpable. No longer was Leo seen as merely an exception or a nuisance, but as a valued individual, his unique abilities finally recognized and celebrated. The quiet murmurs among the executives were now filled with awe, a genuine respect replacing their initial bewilderment. As the event concluded, Leo and Sophia exited the gleaming Quasar Corporation building into the soft late afternoon light of New York City. The bustling avenues, usually a source of sensory overwhelm, now seemed to hum with a different rhythm, a softer, more harmonious symphony. Sophia's arm was around Leo's shoulders, a gentle, protective embrace, her face radiating a quiet joy that had been absent for too long. Leo, still clutching his riverstone, looked up at the towering glass and steel edifice, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. The building, once a symbol of a world that didn't quite understand him, now felt different, imbued with a new promise. His life, once defined by quiet routines and unseen struggles, was undeniably changing for the better, a vast, unexplored horizon of possibilities stretching out before him, beckoning with the promise of recognition and acceptance. Months later, the vibrant energy of New York City now hummed with a different cadence for Leo. He walked the polished halls of the New York Academy for Exceptional Minds, the soft, diffused lighting and hushed academic atmosphere a welcome contrast to the jarring fluorescence of Quasar. His riverstone, still a comforting presence in his pocket, was now a choice, not a necessity, a reminder of his journey rather than a constant anchor against sensory assault. He was still Leo, with his focused gaze and precise movements, but a subtle confidence radiated from him. Classrooms designed with calming colors and dedicated, quiet zones allowed his hyper-focus on human anatomy to flourish, his mind devouring complex medical texts and 3D simulations with an unburdened joy. His questions met with understanding and intellectual curiosity from his new peers and teachers. He found a quiet comfort in the shared neurodiversity, a sense of belonging he hadn't fully experienced before. Back at Quasar Corporation, Sophia moved through the gleaming corridors of her new domain, the Facility Management Department, with a quiet, authority born of earned respect. Her tired eyes, once etched with worry, now held a serene light. Her office, spacious and filled with natural light, was a far cry from the cramped service areas she once patrolled. She oversaw new initiatives, from sensory-friendly lighting installations in common areas to quiet zones for neurodiverse employees, her deep understanding of Leo's needs now informing corporate policy. The significant salary increase and reduced working hours meant more evenings at home with Leo, sharing quiet meals and watching documentaries together, their bond deepened by shared triumph and newfound stability. The metallic tang of ambition that once permeated the air was subtly diluted by a new scent of opportunity and inclusion. Quasar Corporation, once a bastion of rigid corporate hierarchy, had undergone a profound metamorphosis. Arthur Sterling, true to his word, had spearheaded a company-wide initiative, Project Spectrum, dedicated to fostering neurodiversity and inclusion. Training programs led by external specialists educated employees on understanding and appreciating different cognitive styles. The once skeptical executives now spoke of unique perspectives and untapped potential. The boardroom, no longer just a symbol of power, occasionally hosted seminars on inclusive practices, its polished surfaces reflecting a new, more empathetic corporate ethos. Julian Sterling, humbled and effectively sidelined, eventually transferred to a satellite office, his prejudice unable to withstand the undeniable shift in the company's core values. Quasar, once just a tech giant, was slowly transforming into a beacon of progressive corporate citizenship. In their Harlem neighborhood, Leo's story, once a hushed whisper among a few, had blossomed into a local legend. The community, always vibrant and resilient, embraced him with a quiet pride. Shopkeepers at the bustling local market, whose boisterous calls once overwhelmed him, now offered gentle smiles and soft greetings. Children who once found him different now looked at him with a mixture of awe and curiosity, some even asking him about the human body. He no longer felt the need to avert his gaze as often, meeting their eyes with a fleeting, comfortable connection. His presence, once an anomaly, was now a celebrated part of the neighborhood's rich tapestry, a living testament to the extraordinary possibilities that emerge when differences are not just tolerated, but truly understood and valued. One afternoon, nestled in his favorite armchair at home, Leo held a well-worn copy of Gray's Anatomy, its pages filled with intricate diagrams. The soft light from the window illuminated his face, revealing a faint, contented smile as he traced the delicate lines of a cardiac muscle. His riverstone rested beside him on the table, a silent companion. He wasn't just memorizing, he was understanding, connecting, seeing the elegant logic in the complex system. The anxieties that once tightened his chest in unfamiliar situations had lessened, replaced by a quiet confidence in his own unique abilities. He knew now that his way of seeing the world, once a source of isolation, was his greatest strength, a powerful lens through which he could discern patterns and solutions others simply couldn't, a gift truly his own. He closed the book, his gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the familiar symphony of Harlem, distant jazz, children's laughter, the rumble of an elevated train, no longer felt overwhelming but harmonious, a complex, beautiful composition. He thought of Arthur Sterling, of the intricate, fragile system he had helped mend. He thought of his mother, her unwavering faith, and the open arms of a world finally beginning to see him. As the golden light of the setting sun painted the brownstones across the street, Leo picked up his riverstone, rubbing its smooth surface with a quiet, knowing touch. His journey had just begun, a boundless horizon of possibilities stretching before him, proving that the deepest understanding often comes from the most unexpected hearts, and true genius resides not in conformity, but in the courage to be uniquely, brilliantly oneself.